Hey there, welcome back to another video. This time around it is a review and a rant on the 2021 animated comedy Tom and Jerry. Now, Tom and Jerry is a pretty familiar franchise for a lot of people. For a lot of different generations over the years, Tom and Jerry have been very beloved and enjoyed by so many different kids and so many different adults who grew up watching these two animated furry characters chase after one another and get into various different hijinks and misadventures. I remember watching Tom and Jerry shorts when they were replayed on Cartoon Network. I remember Tom and Jerry Kids. I actually do remember that show. And I remember seeing the animated movie and even as a kid, not really being that big of a fan of it. I never was like the biggest fan of Tom and Jerry. I got to be honest. I was never like, oh my God, I love Tom and Jerry. I wasn't a Tom and Jerry stan by any means, but they were enjoyable enough, and I could see why they had their fair share of fans and people that enjoyed the shorts or the other cartoons or animated shows that they had had since the initial run of the original Tom and Jerry animated shorts. So I did see some merit to a modern live action animated hybrid with these characters, but I just had this feeling about this movie from the trailer that this was yet another instance of a studio using a somewhat well known property as a quick and easy way to make money. And I get it. At the end of the day, movies are a lot about making money, it's a lot about profit and so on and so forth. And this on paper is an easy way to make money because sadly, when it comes to kids' movies and kids' movies franchises, unless we're talking about Pixar or some of Disney's other movies, DreamWorks at times put a little bit more effort into their stuff too. But with these kind of well-known animated franchises like Alvin and the Chipmunks and the Smurfs or Trolls, you don't really have to put that much effort into the story or the adaptation, and you'll still make a buttload of money. So I can see why Warner Brothers saw this film as another quick cash grab opportunity. We could just crap out a Tom and Jerry script and churn this movie out and put it in theaters, and we'll make $500 million worldwide because kids don't know any better. And parents just like the fact that there's something to distract their kids for a couple hours and that they can get out of the house. They didn't expect that the pandemic would be a thing, so that definitely hurt their initial plans for this movie, and I definitely feel it hurt whatever plans they had for a franchise, because there's no way that this makes enough profit for them to make another one, at least spend $79 million on a Tom and Jerry sequel. But it just speaks to a problem that a lot of these attempts at resurrecting an old property ultimately run into, like The Adventures of Rocky and Bullwinkle, which I gotta be honest, the more I think about that movie, it's a lot better than this. At least that was an attempt to be something different, to take Rocky and Bullwinkle and those characters and bring them into a completely different situation with them in modern day, uh, at least modern day when it comes to the time that the film was released. This This really reeks of a script from the mid 2000s that was found in a dusty old file cabinet and had the bare minimum of updates to it to make it seem like it's fresh and it's new. Because there are so many dated references in this that are just stunning in terms of how dated they are. And not only that, you have so many forced mentions of popular social media platforms like TikTok or Twitter. You have a lot of stuff that's just forced and shoehorned into the script to make it seem like it's new, like it's hip, like it's lit, so to speak. I know I sound old saying that, but that's kind of what script is clearly trying to do. References to Instagram, references to uh, all these other popular social media platforms. You have a scene where Jerry takes a selfie with Tom while Tom's head is stuck in a streetlight. They even have a social media account. They have a Twitter feed. So there's a lot of really shoehorned pop culture stuff that I'm so tired of seeing with these kind of adaptations, because there's nothing that dates your film more than shoving in pop culture references or references to current things that are popular and trending. So, yeah, as you can see, I definitely was not a fan of this movie. I think it's one of those films that you probably could watch with your kids and your kids would enjoy it, but that doesn't mean that it's a good film. It doesn't mean that it's even a good kids movie. Kids deserve better. Why do we have to deliver the lowest common denominator and the lowest effort when it comes to kids movies like this? Just because the kids don't know any better. I don't understand that, because yeah, they may not know better, but with something like Tom and Jerry that's been around for so long, you would think that you would put more of a soul into it. You think you would take more care and appreciation of the project and what you're doing with it, instead of just doing an Alvin and the Chipmunks or Smurfs. It's like we don't need that kind of shit. Those sucked. They were terrible, but they made money and some kids enjoyed them, but that doesn't mean that they're good kids films, and it doesn't mean that they're good adaptations of these characters and of these stories. And when you add up the fact that Tom and Jerry, even up to this point, have already been milked to death on home video with these countless direct-to-video movies where Tom and Jerry are in the Chocolate Factory, Tom and Jerry are in Wizard of Oz, Tom and Jerry go to Mars, Tom and Jerry do this. It's like this franchise has already been milked dry, and then they come out with another Tom and Jerry property. And sadly, instead of taking the time to provide something that really does capture the spirit of the shorts, or takes a lot of appreciation and respect into account for these legendary, iconic animated characters, you just get more of the same shit that you already saw from Warner Brothers with the direct-to-video Tom and Jerry movies. And that's just disappointing. And if you're a really big fan of these characters, I can't even imagine how you're feeling right now. You're probably sunk because, oh, finally get a new Tom and Jerry thing, and that actually has a budget behind it. It's not just a direct-to-video movie, and it's the same heartless, soulless cash grab approach that all of the other Tom and Jerry movies have been. So Tom and Jerry's directed by Tim Story, who apparently decided to do this because he's a huge fan of the shorts and he wanted to do it justice. And At the end of the day, I don't think Tim's story is really the problem. His direction is basic. His direction isn't really anything that impressive, as usual when it comes to Tim's story, but it's not terrible by any means. Uh, I would say his direction works better when he's dealing with Tom and Jerry, when he's dealing with slapstick or cartoon scenarios. When he's directing scenes with just the human cast, it's very flat, it's very boring. But when he's directing sequences that deal with the cartoon characters, it does seem like there is some genuine passion there for those scenes. Um, where the film really falters, though, where it completely falls flat on its face, is with its screenplay. One screenwriter, Kevin Costello. And I think Kevin Costello, like I said earlier, I think he just took an old script and threw a sloppy coat of paint on it, threw some modern references of social media, buzzwords like gender fluid. I shit you not. There is a whole scene in this movie where there's an argument with characters about whether or not Jerry is male or female, and mentioning that it's okay if he's gender fluid. Yeah, gender fluid Jerry. I can hear people cringing right now. I could just see a ton of people just cringing at the thought of that and at me mentioning that, but it's true. There's a line of dialogue where it's like, maybe he's gender fluid. It's like, I hate it when movies do this shit because it's clearly just an excuse to prop up some kind of bullshit political agenda. It never really fits in, and it sticks out like a sore thumb. It's not funny. It's just awkward and strange and out of place. And it doesn't help either that when people talk about this kind of stuff, it's as if the screenwriter was walking on eggshells the entire time because they're so afraid of getting canceled. So they have lines of dialogue when it comes to these kind of discussions that are so unrealistic. Nobody fucking talks like this in real life. Even in a world where cartoon animals are real, that's completely unrealistic. And what's crazy about that scene, there is no other sequences that mention anything like that throughout the rest of the movie. So what was even the point of throwing gender fluid Jerry out there? Because if it was meant to be a joke, it wasn't funny. If it was meant to be some kind of observation, it's fucking pointless and reeks of desperation. In terms of, oh, I gotta put my agenda in here. I gotta get some woke points. Let's mention how Jerry might be gender fluid. And if it's a kids movie, kids don't know what the fuck gender fluid is. So why would you even bother throwing that in there? Like, who is what? What kind of lines? Yeah, what kind of lines were people blowing when they decided to throw in a line like that? But seriously, I just don't understand this thought process of these kind of political points that are just shoved into places where they have no business being just because. And that's not the only issue that this script has. This script has a myriad, an absolute truckload of problems. That's just the tip of the iceberg. Once again, it's another one of those plots where the majority of the focus is on human characters. And the script does such a lazy job fleshing out any of these characters to the point where you don't give a fuck about any of them. You don't care whether they live or die. You don't care whether or not they solve whatever conflict that the script is throwing out there. So it causes the film to be really dull and boring. Despite all the high energy animation, it's a boring film because the majority of the movie is focused on these human characters and this really uninspired and uninteresting drama about a celebrity wedding. Why the fuck should I care whether or not two rich, spoiled celebrities have their dream wedding at this hotel? Why should I care that Chloe Grace Moretz's character finds a way to use her con artist scheme of taking somebody's resume and taking a job at the hotel and somehow turning it into a long time opportunity for her? Why should I care that she makes it all work and proves her worth? She's a fucking con artist. Why should I give a shit about any of that? And when it comes to Tom and Jerry, it's the simplest shit. It's just like, oh, Tom and Jerry are mad at one another, and Tom wants to go after Jerry. Jerry takes up a residence in the hotel and is living large and ballin', and Tom wants Jerry. So there's a good chunk of the movie that's just Tom trying to get into the hotel to get to Jerry, and various shenanigans and hijinks ensue. Uh, and then when you think things might get a little more interesting, it's just more of the same. It's just this time Tom is actually in the hotel and he's hired by the hotel to get Jerry. It's still the same conflict between the two, and I understand, yes, that's the way it has been in the shorts, but that also exposes what works in shorts doesn't always work in a feature film. If you're going to try to have this kind of dynamic, it isn't necessarily strong enough for a feature film. It all comes down to Tom chasing after Jerry, and that's about it. There was a promising bit where Tom and Jerry were forced to have to get along and spend a day together, and the film didn't even do a good job with that. It barely touched upon that at all. It seemed like that was just there so Tom and Jerry could sneak a selfie in, and then you could have more dated references, and a reason for them to get caught and sent to the kennel to create some other conflict that's resolved so quickly and so predictably. It wasn't, there was not even a point to it in the first place. But it's just, yeah. From a screenwriting perspective, this script sucks. The plot's not engaging. It doesn't have to be that complicated, but it has to be interesting. There has to be something to draw you in consistently. And when the majority of the focus is on these human characters in this wedding, there's no reason to really care about anything. It's very shallow. And it also takes away from what is arguably the best thing about the film, which is Tom and Jerry. There are some really fun, high energy, well animated sequences with Tom and Jerry. There's a sequence with Tom and Jerry where they're using a drone and a motorized skateboard in the climax, which I actually think is one of the better scenes in the movie. When they're chasing after one another, when they are doing their whole shtick where they are trying to one up one another. It's endearing. There is a certain enjoyability to all of that. But then the film will cut away and go back to the human characters and that plot, and the film dies. It fucking dies as a result because you just don't give a shit. If the script actually cared enough and actually put more of an effort into these human characters, into this whole plot, then maybe this combination of live action and animation would actually have a point and would actually work and it would be satisfying. But that's not the case at all. Tom and Jerry feel like they're cameos in what's supposed to be their own movie. And that's always a mistake when it comes to these kind of adaptations, where they take a live action premise and then throw in some animation into it. I'll say it again. They should have just spent the money and made new Tom and Jerry shorts for the modern age and put them on HBO Max instead of doing this lazy cash grab live action hybrid with fart jokes and poop jokes and predictable bullshit where, oh, the wedding goes awry and everything goes to hell in a handbasket and then everything gets resolved in the end because it's predictable. It's cliched. I mean, this has one of the most predictable final acts that you'll ever see. You know, the whole thing about, oh my God, they aren't gonna get married, and the wedding was a disaster, and then, oh no, they do get married because everything turns out all right in the end. But I will say this: when it comes to the happy ending, this script somehow gets that wrong. Because for some reason, it decides that Michael Pena's character, who throughout the entire movie was depicted as an absolute prick, an asshole, and he's the reason why the wedding went horribly wrong, because he snuck in and lied to Tom and Jerry and told them that they hated one another. So he tricked them into thinking that he was going to take one to the hotel to help him with something, but ultimately both wound up there. So they wound up fighting and just creating absolute havoc. And this guy, previously, he lost his job because he's incompetent and he's a egocentric dickhead. And then he gets his job back, and Chloe Grace Moretz's character, even though she did lie to get the job, was still doing a better job at his job than he was. And she loses her job. He gets his job back. And then they do this whole bullshit where they try to make it a happy ending for him. What? He didn't earn that at all. He earned to be out on the street. Does not deserve to get his job back. He's an egocentric prick. Why should he get his job back? That makes no sense. He's the one that caused the wedding to go horribly awry because he lied to Tom and Jerry and caused them to fight one another and a dog and caused a massive tornado and scared the elephants and did all this other shit. Why the fuck did he get his job back? So yeah, it even gets the happy ending wrong. Because there's no reason at all for him to get his job back. Because he never shows any semblance of development as a character where he becomes a likable character. Where he becomes somebody who has merit. Other than just being a bad person. And being a really god-awful character. He's the scheming event manager. And that's all he ever was prior until the ending. And then somehow it's trying to give him a happy ending. He doesn't fucking deserve it. Just like Tom and Jerry did not deserve this piece of shit screenplay. With these unlikable characters, these predictable plot points, really cringe-inducing lines of dialogue, like, why is there Wi-Fi on a skateboard? Why the fuck not? Why the fuck not? God. Or the gender fluid mouse bullshit. Or the really dated references. I mean, there's a Matrix reference in this. Tom and Jerry are about to fight, and Jerry does he does that move. I was expecting Jerry to do some bullet time at one point. Bend over backwards and dodge some cheese or some shit. I was like, what the fuck is this? A Matrix reference? And if that wasn't bad enough, there's a Mission Impossible reference where Jerry is doing the rope thing like Ethan Hunt in the first Mission Impossible. Like that hadn't been done a million times already. There was a reference to Steve Bartman, the Chicago Cubs fan who caught the ball and uh, ruined Cubs fans' lives for that one year because I think he might have cost them a playoff game. They have a reference in this that throws Jerry and Tom into that scenario where Tom and Jerry are going to a Yankees game. Tom catches the ball, and Tom is then hated by all of New York along with Jerry, and then they're thrown into a kennel. And it's like, really? A Steve Bartman reference? This has to be a script from the mid 2000s. There's no way in hell it's not, because there's no reason for those references to be there otherwise. They just took an old script and threw in Twitter and TikTok references and Wi-Fi and buzzwords and had it take place in something close to modern day in terms of 2019, 2020, or 2021, and that's all they fucking did with it. And when it comes to the other aspects of the movie, I mean, the music, bland, banal, just as forgettable, to be honest, as most of the movie. The cinematography by Alan Stewart, meh. Editing by Peter S. Elliott, it was okay. It has a running time of an hour and 40 something minutes, but that's with the end credits. Without the end credits, it's only an hour and 30 something minutes long. And you would think that at that length, it would be a fast paced film. But no, it's not. It's not a fast paced, funny, furry good time because, like I said, the majority of the plot is about these human characters. It's about Chloe Grace Moretz's con artist character, Kayla, who has a hard time keeping jobs and then decides to lie and steal someone's resume to get this job as a event planner or event planner assistant for this celebrity wedding at this hotel. Michael Pena is just the villain. He's the scheming manager who is just insufferable, and he's just a really shitty person. And once again, Michael Pena plays the same role that he's been playing since Ant-Man. I'm getting tired of it. Either he needs to branch out and do some dramatic acting or figure something else out, because at this point, I'm beginning to think that he's not that good of an actor. I'm beginning to think that Michael Pena is just one of those actors who has one gear and that's it. Chloe Grace Moretz, I like her. I've liked her since Kick-Ass, but she has been picking a lot of bad roles lately. She wasn't good in Neighbors 2. She wasn't good here. She was very awkward and stilted. Her scenes with Tom and Jerry were very forced and not natural at all. There were a lot of scenes featuring her that were very cringy. Her talking about popping bottles was just an absolute cringe fest. You've got Colin Jost, who plays Ben, the groom of the wedding, and he's just a jackass. The kind of hard-headed jackass type that he's rich and he's in love with his wife, but he doesn't really know better. And I don't get why Colin Jost is a thing in Hollywood. I never was really that impressed with him on Weekend Update. And any film that I've seen him in, he has sucked. He has been terrible. He has no personality, no charisma. He comes across as a guy who can only be sarcastic, and that's it. And anytime he's trying to do anything other than being sarcastic and being a wise ass, he cannot pull it off. So when he's trying to be charming and sweet, he comes across as a sarcastic wise ass. So you're like, fuck this guy. Rob Delaney, same kind of role you see him play. The goofy, happy-go-lucky character who means well but is kind of a dumbass. Ken Jeong, loud, brash, and obnoxious. as usual. Pallavi Sharda as Prita, the bride. I would say she delivered the best performance, but her character was still very shallow, and I really didn't care that much about her in the end. And everyone else, worthless. Who cares? Um, you had T-Pain, who was Tom's singing voice. Yeah, there was a lot of that too. A lot of modern, popular songs, and I understand why films like this do that, but that's another thing that'll make this film age like milk in 5 years. People will be like, "What? Who is that? Who's singing?" Like, oh, it's T-Pain. Who the fuck is T-Pain? You got Little Rail Howery, who plays who does the voice of Tom's Shoulder Devil and Shoulder Angel, because he's in a lot of Tim Story films and a lot of films. Period. Tim Story is the announcer. Who's a pigeon that appears every now and then and narrates some scenes. From the very beginning, you had like a hip hop track, which just doesn't fit with Tom and Jerry. So there's just a lot of stuff that just is so out of place, just shoved in there, and it hurts more than it helps the film at the end of the day. So yeah, none of the performances are really anything that great. The best thing about the film is the animation. When it is there, I actually thought it was pretty good. The animation of Tom and Jerry in particular had a lot of nice energy to it. And I feel that it would have been interesting, though, to have more hard lines on the animation, though, because without the hard lines, it doesn't really stand out as much when it's in live action. So there are some moments where the animation's a little soft, too soft, so it just kind of doesn't pop. It doesn't pop as much as it would if it had more hard lines on it. But if it was just a CGI animated short with that style, then you don't even really have to have any hard lines because everything is in the same style, which is just another reason why this should have just been more shorts. Why do a live action film with this boring story that doesn't even really need Tom and Jerry if you think about it? The only reason why Tom and Jerry are there is so you can have some laughs for the kids in the audience and a little bit of conflict that they get involved with because Jerry's a kleptomaniac and steals the wife's wedding ring. So you have to have that whole thing where, oh, I need the wedding ring back. But even that's resolved so quickly. It's like, oh, he stole the ring. And it seems like there's going to be some conflict where Kayla's going to have to convince Jerry and earn his trust so Jerry can give her the ring. But they don't even do anything with that. They just move on to the next thing. Because there's a lot of that in this screenplay. Something's brought up, and then they move on to the next thing. Because fuck it. We don't give a shit. We don't care enough about the story or the quality of the storytelling, so let's just go from point A to point B to point C as quickly as humanly possible. So yeah, Tom and Jerry, it was a pretty terrible movie. I'm not going to say this is the worst film that I've seen this year. I will definitely say, from what I've seen this year, Barb and Star, Go to Vista Del Mar is still the worst film that I've seen in 2021. But this is still going to be on my worst list. Disappointing, really low effort production. You know, exactly what I was afraid it was going to be, a lazy, uninspired cash grab. And I'm so sick and tired of these lazy, uninspired kids' movies that just take a well known property and put the most minimal effort into it and call it a day. Because to me, it's just pointless. It's absolutely pointless. The $79 million could have been spent better on other projects that have more merit or more thought put into them. Or you could have split it up or used half of that and done more Tom and Jerry shorts. Instead, you got a film that's so bad it makes you want to eat your shorts. or feels like your private parts are stuck in a mousetrap from hell. So yeah, I've talked about the film more than I thought I was going to, and but that's because it's just got a lot of issues, and it just comes down to the screenplay, dated references, awful attempts at humor, unlikable characters, a incredibly uninteresting overall plot, and there really isn't enough good things or moments of promise that outweigh all the negatives. Yes, it's a kids movie, but that doesn't mean it has to suck. It doesn't mean it has to be as lazy as a film like this is. Do better. Not only for audiences that are above the age of 5, but for kids too. Because kids deserve better. And so do Tom and Jerry. If you were going to do this kind of approach, you were going to take this big of a fat dump on these characters after all of the other dumps that they've already taken to the face at this point. Why? Why put them through that kind of torture? And why put the fans through that kind of torture when you don't have to? But anyway, that's my thoughts on Tom and Jerry. If it still sounds interesting to you, if you're a big enough fan of the characters and of the franchise, you're probably going to see it anyway. And I hope you do enjoy it a lot more than I did. But yeah, this was just a complete and total misfire in so many different ways. And it just sucks because Tom and Jerry, while they're not perfect, and while I'm not the biggest fan in the world of these characters, the bits of animation that I did see, I did have fun with. And that's what really makes this film that's just such a disaster so frustrating, because you have these moments of promise with these characters and with this animation, and you completely totally waste it with lazy, uninspired garbage.